Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime. Thanks so much for joining us here in New York City. You're watching Arise News Now Weekend, where you'll get some deeper insight into stories making headlines all around the world. Our top story, the former president of Haiti, Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier, has died at home. Plus, the Centers for Disease Control has come out swinging against the Ebola virus. And we'll take a look at the life of the man who was once everybody's favorite TV dad, Bill Cosby. We have those stories and much more straight ahead. Today's top story, former Haitian leader Jean-Claude Duvalier has died. After years in exile, Duvalier, also known as Baby Doc, returned to Haiti in 2011, where he died of a heart attack Saturday. While some Haitians are too young to remember life under a Duvalier regime, history remembers the dictator and his government's especially violent special militia known as the Tonton Macoute. The group killed and tortured thousands of Duvalier political opponents with impunity. Duvalier was only 19 years old when he was tapped by his father, Francois Papa Doc Duvalier, to take over the presidency. Baby Doc Duvalier was 63. Well, the streets of Hong Kong's Central Business District were crowded Saturday as pro-democracy protests continue. The rally coming a few hours after the city's leader demanded that protesters leave the area before Monday. Here's more on that story.
A tug of war between rival protesters in a gritty district of Hong Kong. Pro-democracy protesters rallied next to government supporters, angry over the barricades set up in Mongkok. Some protesters chanted, "Call the police," though the police presence was thin. After a tense night, which resulted in 19 arrests, many people are frustrated with security forces, accusing them of cooperating with criminal gangs during the protests. But police say they're standing by their mandate.
We strongly condemn all violent acts. Any violent act to damage the public order and public safety is not accepted and is not to be tolerated by the general public and police.
Over the past week, tens of thousands of demonstrators have occupied Hong Kong's streets, demanding full democracy, including a free voting system when they go to choose a new leader in 2017. There are also some in Hong Kong who, simply put, are against the violence.
Most of them, they must go down to talk about the future of Hong Kong in peaceful way, not use the violence activity, not use the way to protest, sit on the street, main street, cause inconvenience to the public.
Beijing so far shows no signs of changing its policies, fearful that calls for democracy in Hong Kong could spread to the mainland, especially if they're successful.
Well, also in regard to China, the Dalai Lama has said that he is now engaged in informal talks with China over his possible return to Tibet, his homeland. The two sides have sparred for years over the future of Tibet. In related news, it is the 25th anniversary of the Dalai Lama's Nobel Peace Prize, but a gathering of Nobel winners was canceled in South Africa this week after that country refused the Dalai Lama a visa, reportedly under pressure from China. You're watching Arise News Now Weekend. Welcome back. Well, a fire at the 9/11 Memorial for Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, destroyed 3 administrative buildings on Friday. Nobody was injured, but the news does raise concerns about the memorabilia and archival material inside. Pennsylvania's National Park Service reports that flames did not touch the still under construction Memorial and Visitor Center. The buildings impacted, however, do make up the park's headquarters, which include offices and storage space. The cause of that fire is still under investigation. Well, the ongoing problems with protecting the president reached a head this week, with the head of the Secret Service finally stepping down after a slew of revelations regarding violations. Here with us to talk more about this is Paul DiRienzo, political analyst and investigative journalist. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know, these problems obviously have been ongoing for the last several years, from allegations of intoxication and, interactions with prostitutes,
Sure.
and clearly these latest breaches in terms of getting into the White House, someone carrying a gun on an elevator with the president. What's going on? I mean, she obviously had to step down.
Yes, I think that there is a problem that's besetting the Secret Service, but it's also besetting the entire intelligence operation, because you have to understand the Secret Service is actually part of Homeland Security. It's one of the 20 different disparate organizations that were brought together after 9/11 into this one large organization, and which has come under repeated criticisms for spending problems, for scandals all throughout the operations of the security operations of the United States, and which has the president himself just a few days ago himself admitted has dropped the ball in being able to tell, for example, that ISIS was on the rise and that the Iraqi army was going to collapse, and many other large glaring errors.
Not just security breaches. We know that Homeland Security's Inspector General a couple of years ago published a report and said that between 2004 and 2012, there had been nearly 800 documented cases of misconduct within the agency, ranging from disruptive behavior, problems with drugs and alcohol. But the IG still found at the end that there was nothing to suggest that that conduct was misconduct in the Secret Service. That's kind of incredible.
Well, I think, again, you have to look at the whole picture. I mean, when ISIS came into power and took over half of Iraq, and the president and the government was not prepared for that, it's a larger problem here of now it's time to stand down. You see, when there's accidents in the military and when decisions can lead to the loss of lives, then it's time to stop making those decisions, to stand down American operations and to look at exactly what we're doing wrong.
Well, the president picked Joseph Clancy to succeed Joe Pearson. Why did he pick him?
Well, he was somebody he knew and somebody had worked with him previously, but I think right now they're stabbing in the dark. I don't think they know really what to do at this point. From the president's own comments just a few days ago.
They're not really sure. We do know that it's been said that some of these problems are pertaining to his race.
Yes, I know that's a conspiracy theory that this is some attempt to set him up for an assassination attempt or something along those lines. I doubt that very much. The personal integrity of the Secret Service, I think, is pretty strong. I think they really wouldn't take the job if they weren't willing to take a bullet for the president.
Paul DiRienzo, that's all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us on Arise News Now Weekend.
Thank you.
Well, back in the nation's capital, there is a different type of crisis. The amount of black staffers on Capitol Hill is low. A new report out of Washington, D.C. shows that diversity on Capitol Hill is still almost non-existent. Staffers on the Hill say that President Barack Obama's presidency has had unintended consequences for minorities in the nation's capital. For a bit of a closer look at that story, we now turn to Arise News Washington correspondent Priya Sridhar for more on that. Priya?
Yeah, so what's fascinating about all of this is actually how little information there is about the number of minorities working on the Hill. In 2006, Democrats tried to get a count of how many minorities were Senate employees. They circulated a survey that came up with the number 6% as minority Senate employees. In 2007, Politico estimated that anywhere from 2 to 3% of Senate staffers were black. There's also a group of African-American Senate staffers and interns here on the Hill that at last count had a membership of only around 75. It's estimated that the number of Senate staffers has stayed around 5,000 for the past few decades, but surprisingly, the number of minority staffers hasn't increased dramatically in recent years. You look at these numbers that range anywhere from 2 to 6% and compare that to the private sector. An Equal Opportunity Employment Commission found that in the private sector, top managerial positions were made up of around 12% minorities. The diversity problem on the Hill does seem to get a little bit better when you look down the totem pole at entry-level positions. A House compensation study from 2010 showed that 17% of House staff assistants identified themselves as non-white. But if you compare that again to the private sector, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission found that about 34% of entry-level positions are held by people who identify themselves as non-white. People who have served in both corporate America and on the Hill say that there aren't as many incentives on Capitol Hill to increase diversity in offices. A lot of private sector companies, however, have made a concerted effort in recent years to recruit and attract talented minorities, and they also have shareholders, board of directors, and customers to answer to. Other representatives have also said that hiring minorities is more important when you have an office in the district that you're representing. But in Washington, your constituents don't necessarily see who your staffers are, so there's less of an incentive, to hire people here. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Arise News Washington correspondent Priya Sridhar, that's all we have time for. Thank you for that report. And you are watching Arise News Now Weekend. Welcome back. Well, earlier we reported about the death of former Haitian President Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier. Here to share more on his life and his death is Gary Pierre. And Mr. Pierre is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and founder of the Haitian Times. Of course, Jean-Michel Aristide is the successor, right?
He came several years after.
Yes.
It was ushered in the democracy era after Baby Doc.
Well, Baby Doc dying today, 63 years old, in his home of a heart attack, was somebody that was also facing, criminal prosecution for these crimes against humanity and atrocities. What was your first reaction when you heard the news of his death today?
Well, Francesca, I wasn't really surprised because when he returned to Haiti about 3 years ago, he looked very sick. He looked like a man who returned home to die. He knew his days were numbered, and he went back. And no matter what he faced, he was willing to go back because he didn't want to die in exile.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that at least 30,000 people, according to Human Rights Watch, Haitians are said to have been killed by his regime and his father's regime. And there were so many different instances of abuses. Talk to me about what it is like for Haitians today to not be able to actually see him go and face justice in court.
Well, we sometimes talk about the 30,000 or so who were killed. But I think we need to talk about those who lived, because sometimes when you live under such tyranny, it's even more difficult for a person. And you have a whole country that lived under tyranny. So it was really bad. I mean, I was just a child during those times, but I remember some moments where this was not really a nice place to live.
Well, the Tonton-Macoutes, of course, famous for their atrocities, committing essentially genocide. Talk to me about any of the things that you may have witnessed then, and where do you think this leaves the country going forward? Because it's sort of the end of an era.
Well, hopefully it's the end of an era, and I hope that we can move forward in a more positive way. But, you talked earlier about him facing justice. I was always skeptical whether or not he would face justice now, because Martelly, the president in power now, is really a neo-Duvalierist. In fact, he tweeted out today he was saddened by the passing of Baby Doc. So it shows you what the thinking among the elite now. It's just basically a neo-Duvalierist administration. And so, the average, when he came back, And the reaction was very telling, because what happened is in Haiti, most people who are not in Haiti don't remember. They were too young, or they just want to forget those dark days. The people who are most affected by this are Haitians who are living outside of Haiti.
So here in New York City, though, there's a huge Haitian community where I live in Brooklyn and throughout the city and area. How do you think that Haiti can move forward? Because clearly it is a country, my heritage, my father Haitian and Dominican, continues to be plagued by other issues, including, as you mentioned, corrupt political leaders as well as natural atrocities.
I just hope that the Haitian leadership and can really seize this opportunity, this moment, to say, okay, let's move forward. Let's learn from it. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the past. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't seen too much lessons learned on the corruption end.
So we still have a long ways to go. Gary Pierre, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Arise News Now Weekend to talk about the passing of baby Doc Duvalier.
My pleasure, Francesca.
All right, time to take a look at some health news now. A United Airlines flight was quarantined for 2 hours upon landing today at Newark Liberty International Airport over fears of the deadly Ebola virus. 2 passengers believed to be from Liberia were exhibiting symptoms associated with the disease, but Port Authority officials do confirm that it was not Ebola. Earlier today, the Centers for Disease Control hosted a press conference to reassure the public that the spread of the disease is, in fact, under control.
We know how to stop outbreaks of Ebola. In this country, we have healthcare infection control and public health systems that are tried and true and will stop before there's any widespread transmission. Nothing that we would have done either in Liberia or in the U.S. would have changed the course of the current situation, because he did not have symptoms during the time that he was boarding or until 4 days after he had landed. At this point, we have identified, in conjunction with folks on the ground in Texas, 9 individuals who we're pretty sure are definite contacts with the source patient, with the index case, as we refer to him. In addition, there are about 40 other people, and the numbers may change by 1 or 2 per day, that we can't rule out had contact. As of yesterday, that number total was 46. And we had been able to reach and monitor the temperatures of all but 1 of those 46.
Well, the Centers for Disease Control went on the communications offensive, saying that they are confident that they can stem the spread of the worst epidemic of Ebola on record. Seema Collier reports.
Hazmat crews are on the ground in Dallas, decontaminating the apartment where an Ebola-infected traveler had been staying. Despite the cleanup, officials say 4 people close to the traveler, Thomas Eric Duncan, who were quarantined there, will be moved to another location. Duncan's case has put the country on high alert.
Today, we are using a whole-of-government approach and response to control this epidemic at its source.
The World Health Organization said Friday at least 3,400 people have died out of nearly 7,500 suspected, probable, and confirmed cases. Despite it being the worst epidemic of the virus on record, officials are confident in their ability to contain it.
Finally, I want to emphasize that the United States is prepared to deal with this crisis, both at home and in the region. Every Ebola outbreak over the past 40 years has been stopped. We know how to do this, and we will do it again.
Stopping Ebola requires identifying infected people, isolating them, caring for them in a way that protects healthcare workers, as well as reaching out to contacts. Health officials in Dallas have narrowed their focus to about 50 people who had direct or indirect contact with Duncan.
This formula has worked very well over many years.
The hospital said the patient had recently traveled from Nigeria, and this morning they announced that he had been cleared of carrying the virus. Seema Collier, Arise News.
Well, the Pentagon said Friday that it may send nearly 4,000 troops to West Africa to support America's response to the Ebola crisis, and officials cautioned its projections of the troops needed may still increase. This dispatch of troops, mostly to Liberia, comes as the World Health Organization hiked the estimated death toll from the virus to almost 3,500 people, and after the first person was diagnosed in the United States. And Texas Health Presbyterian Hospital announcing today that that person, Thomas Eric Duncan, is now in critical condition. His condition was previously listed as serious. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., a patient at Howard University, well, that hospital there, he has been cleared as not actually having the Ebola virus, but in what they described as an abundance of caution, the hospital does say that it has admitted and isolated that patient when he showed possible symptoms. You're watching Arise News Now Weekend. New York real estate mogul Donald Trump is at it again. He is now sounding off against the new ABC family comedy Blackish, calling it racist. In a tweet, the 68-year-old Apprentice host said, "How is ABC television allowed to have a show entitled Blackish? Can you imagine the furor of a show Whitish? Racism at highest levels?" Needless to say, responses were mixed, with some agreeing and others not so much. Well, Blackish is just the latest in a host of TV sitcoms that have highlighted Black families. Family Matters, The Fresh Prince, The Bernie Mac Show, just to name a few. And recently I did have the chance to talk with an author about the icon who put that genre on the map. Well, whether you grew up watching TV in the 1980s or not, there's no doubt that you've heard of The Cosby Show and its star, comedian Bill Cosby. The show and its stars introduced America to a Black family dealing with problems that all families can really relate to, and consequently transformed the way that some people saw Black Americans. Here to talk with us a little bit more about the man behind the show's title is the author of the new biography, Cosby, His Life and Times, Mark Whitaker. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see this, and I love the sweaters, you know.
You had to have the sweater.
You have to have the sweater on there. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, you know, like millions of people, I've always been a Bill Cosby fan. It started when I was a kid in the 60s. You know, I come from a mixed-race family. My dad was Black, my mom is white. They had split up, and we had ended up with my mom living in a small town in Massachusetts where there are no people of color. So all of a sudden, she brings home this comedy album with this handsome Black man on the cover telling these hilarious stories about having his tonsils out and smearing the floor with Jell-O to keep the chicken heart monster away.
Right.
And then later, you know, 20 years later, in the 80s, I was just starting a family when The Cosby Show came on the air. So I loved that show, but it also was sort of, you know, a model of family life for me and my wife. But I was also interested in him as a social figure because, as I think I show in the book, I think he is someone in a quiet, subtle way who's made a huge difference in the history of this country.
And that was leading into my next question, because it's been said that in some ways we may not have ever elected a Black president or a biracial president, depending on how you want to look at it, as the President of the United States, had we not been introduced to the Cosby family.
So you know who made that point on election night 2008?
The Huxtable family.
Karl Rove. Karl Rove was on Fox News 15 minutes after Barack Obama was declared president, saying that The Cosby Show had helped prepare people, I think, not only for electing Obama, but the idea of an African-American family in our national home, the White House.
Well, you know, that is obviously the biggest role that our nation has to have, but in the world of media and television, you also held extremely high roles at both CNN and NBC. What was it like to transform from being the head of, you know, a news gathering division to then writing this book? Did it help? Were there parodies?
Well, in some ways it was nice to get back to how I started. The reason I went into this business was to write and to report. And the fact is, Cosby did not cooperate with this book at the beginning. It took me a year of reporting and interviewing and research before he finally reached out to me and said, I see that you're serious about this, so I'm going to give you some access and some cooperation. So, and by that time, even though I probably, I had limited time with him, mostly on the phone, and I got to travel with him, I was really ready because I had done all my research and my reporting, and I knew exactly what I needed to get from him.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned about Bill Cosby in doing your research?
So we all know about Bill Cosby's successes, but what people don't know, most people, are all the failures. He's had a lot of professional setbacks, TV shows before and after the Cosby Show that were flops, periods in his career where things weren't working. He almost went bankrupt in the early 70s because his manager put him into a bad production deal. And he's also experienced a lot of pain and struggle in his own in his personal life, starting with his difficult childhood, growing up in a housing project in North Philadelphia, all the way through the murder of his only son, Ennis.
We also know that you chose not to go into some of the sexual allegations against Bill Cosby in this book. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I do get into, some of his personal life and, some of his history of indiscretions and infidelity and so forth. But I wanted to make sure that everything in this book was completely accurate and that I could stand behind it. And some of these allegations were ones that there had never been any definitive court findings. There was no independent witnesses. And I just felt that journalistically, I couldn't defend putting them in the book unless I could say for absolute sure that they had happened.
Well, journalistically, do you see yourself getting back into news, or do you have a new topic for a new tome that you want to...
Well, we'll see what comes along. But I've really enjoyed writing books. And I'm particularly interested now that, having written this book, actually about the history of this medium of television, and it's been so influential, and it's only been in the last 75 years. And I'm thinking of going back to the beginning and kind of like telling the story of the origins of television, because I think it probably can also tell us some important things about this new digital era that we're starting to go into.
And clearly, with that digital platform, a lot more opportunities for expression. And I think also some of the things that you and I share are authors, our alma mater, then, of course, being journalists, but also being biracial. How, and you obviously have children now, how has that shaped your worldview, do you think? And how are different voices being represented and maybe misrepresented or need to still be represented in the media that we see today?
Well, one of the things that I think, I think has happened in the society, I think, is that people from many different backgrounds feel very comfortable, being who they are and a kind of diversity. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's necessarily reflected enough, I think, in our media. But it's going to have to be, because that's the way our country is going demographically. And unless the media catches up, they're going to be missing an opportunity in terms of audience.
Mark Whitaker, thank you so much for joining us, the author of Cosby, His Life and Times.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're watching Arise News Now Weekend.
I have never worked for a news organization like Arise News. The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in. In this news organization, everybody's opinion counts. There is no big I's and little U's. Every angle, every perspective matters, and that's freeing in so many ways.
Well, in Southern California this week, there was a record-setting battle, but this was of a bit of the softer kind. In Irvine, California, 4,000 students gathered to have the world's largest pillow fight. Sharon Reich reports.
Now, there's one way to get rid of the back-to-school blues. Students at the University of California in Irvine traded their books for pillows in an attempt to set a new Guinness World Record for the largest pillow fight. With 4,200 people, they bested the previous record, which was set at a concert in Chicago.
The largest pillow fight is 4,200. So you've beaten the current world record of 3,813. Congratulations. You're officially amazing.
The annual pillow fight is part of a welcoming tradition on campus for newcomers, organized by Student Services VP Josh Nguyen.
Today, UCI broke its 5th world record for the world's largest pillow fight.
Who says school has to be boring.